lovelies! You're listening to episode 4 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I would love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can check out the links below. Now let's get to the story. Slumped on a low rock wall, Janir stared at the moonlit monument before her. She was on a rise overlooking the lush vale below the castle. Mounds and stone pillars lined the hillside to mark the generations of Caersons and their wives who had lived and died over the centuries. Behind the hill, far in the distance, were the mountains. Their powerful silhouettes blocked the stars, and their white peaks gleamed like gemstones. Some might have considered the hill a frightening place, particularly at night. More superstitious people believed it to be haunted. Even if it was haunted, Armandius had guaranteed her that the ghosts would be friendly. He once asked her if there was nothing but trust and love in life, why should that change just because a person was dead? If there were any of his deceased family members lurking about the mounds, they wouldn't harm her because she was precious to Armandius, and they would respect his judgment. All the same, Janir often wondered if they would despise her as Velasquez and Broffi did. Had not several of them died in wars against Argotolums? It had taken her at least an hour to trudge her way through the brambles and briars of the woods that lay around the castle and the cultivated fields of crops. Janir was crying again, tears streaming down her face. Rocking silently back and forth, she felt very alone. The 7-point medallion was cold and solid in her fingers, the symbol of Armandius's protection, his acceptance. Janir clung to that as tightly as she could. "I wish you were still here," she whispered to the wind. The sound of horses' hooves came from behind her. Janir recognized the murmured command from the rider. The horse eased to a halt, and the rider swung off, habitually patting the beast's neck. There didn't seem to be anything to say. She stayed as she was. Armandius came up from behind and wrapped his arms around her. Janir flung her arms around his neck like she used to as a child. Neither of them said anything for a while. "You ran quite far," Armandius remarked at length, releasing her from his embrace. "Nearly a mile. No one saw you go." "Then how did you know where to find me?" Janir sniffled. Armandius shrugged. "You've always come here, after you and I had an argument or when you were upset. Always." Janir nodded and motioned vaguely to the youngest of the solemn tombs. "When I was little, I used to think she could hear me." Armandius stared absently at the stone pillar. "Sometimes I still do." Janir often thought common loss had been part of what had drawn her and Armandius so close together. "What am I to do?" she asked, voice quavering. "I know I can't be here at dawn." Armandius didn't answer straight away. He continued gazing vacantly at the monument. "You must leave." Janir was dumbstruck. Leave? She had never left Greenhaven since arriving there. Where could she possibly go? The world seemed to once again begin spinning beneath her, whirling wildly without any apparent direction. "But, Father, how will I, she stammered. "Only for a while," Armandius assured her, "until I can work some things out." "Where will I go?" she managed to mumble. "To the mountains. Higher up, they are relatively uninhabited and rather mild this time of year." "What? With the weirwargs and the griffins and the snow?" Janir hesitated. "My girl," Armandius lifted her chin, "you know I would come with you if I could, but I cannot. I must be here when the men from Virida arrive, if for nothing else, to convince them that we are not under attack." Janir said nothing. Of course he couldn't send anyone else with her. No one but Velasquez and Broffy knew. The shock of the situation left her dizzy and disoriented. It seemed she should have seen this was coming. What else had she expected? Attempting to pull herself together, she covered her face with her hands and tried to think of something, anything except what was happening. "We've hunted in the mountains before. We both know you can manage long enough. Now you must go, Jenny," Armandius prompted. He rested a hand on her shoulder and tugged her off the stone wall. "Right." Janir was stunned, but rose to her feet. She was having trouble thinking clearly, but she managed. "Can we go back to Greenhaven Castle so I can grab a few things?" "No," he replied. "I have everything you will need here." Glancing past his shoulder, Janir saw her bay stallion, Colbo, beside Armandius's dappled gray steed. Colbo looked confused and uncertain, but ready. Sadly, she noticed that his saddlebags had been fully packed for a stay in the mountains. Colbo's coat gleamed in the moonlight, and his intelligent eyes watched her with expectation. Sensing the impending departure, he snorted and pawed the ground. "But how will I know when to come back?" Janir asked, gathering her wits enough to think of that question. "I will send either Velasquez or Seoven for you." Taking her hand in a firm grasp, Armandius led her to stand beside Colbo. "Goodbye, my child." "Don't say that." Janir was crying again. "It's not forever," he assured her. "Just for now." Guiding her to Colbo's saddle, he boosted her onto the stallion's back. Seated astride the horse, Janir began to wonder if she would ever return. "There most likely aren't enough provisions in those saddlebags, so you'll have to hunt at some point." "Fine." Janir was only half listening. Just for a moment, his determination softened. "Whatever blood may say, you are my daughter, Janir Kayerson." "Father." "You need to go," he interrupted, "before the captain of the guard starts looking for us both." There were at least a dozen things she should ask him before she left, but in that instant Janir was too dazed and distressed to think of them all. What about wild animals? She wasn't sure why that, of all things, came to mind. "You can deal with them," he replied. "You are a capable huntress. They are in greater danger than you." "You say that in spite of my previous hunting record." The last time they had gone hunting, she had refused to bring down their quarry, a 10-point stag. He had just been too harmless and beautiful. It frustrated the huntsmaster to no end. "If it came to Colbo's or your life against the beasts, I believe you would not hesitate to destroy the creature." Armandius paused. "Be safe." Slapping Colbo's hindquarter, Armandius stood back as the horse charged past the mounds and up the hill, doing her best to guide Colbo through the dense brush of Greenhaven. Janir tried to keep tears from clouding her vision, but it was no use, and soon Colbo's mane was damp with the salty drops. The world was still. No sound but the gentle thumping of Colbo's hooves on the grass. Restlessly, Janir shifted in the saddle. At least Armandius had sent a change of clothes with her to replace the blue silk dress. These past 3 days and nights would have rendered it to rags. She wore her moss-green riding habit, one of the ones Dame Salila had ordered sewn for her last autumn. Necessarily, the long sleeves would keep her warm in the chilly mountains, and the black leggings underneath her split skirt would as well. The skilled seamstresses who worked for Armandius knew how to make something both comfortable and functional. Janir still had the crest of the Kayerson house, the chain wrapped around her wrist into a bracelet. Something about it reassured her, anchored her hope. In Colbo's saddlebags were a blanket for the horse and a few of the girl's mostly unused hunting tools. Not long after setting out, she had found the mahogany box. Armandius had packed it, though she didn't know why. The Lord Argotolum had sent her away too, and she had never seen him since. Though she wouldn't mind horribly if she died never seeing the Lord Argotolum again. Armandius was another matter. He had protected her, guarded her, embraced her, been everything a father should have been. Since leaving him on that hillside, she and Kalbo had been riding. After moving through the daylight, they would stop for a short rest before riding on into the early evening and breaking camp. Janir pressed her stallion for long hours, but they kept an easy speed, never faster than a trot. They were getting deeper and deeper into the foothills, reaching the actual mountains themselves. Janir wondered if she shouldn't stop and set up a permanent camp soon. She didn't want to venture too far, just enough not to be found by accident. Before she knew it, they were making their way through the winding path of a narrow mountain gorge. Like curtains, the clouds hung in a gray sheet against the sky, a fitting accompaniment to her mood. As they reached the foothills, the land became cold and uninviting. The harsher wind was blocked by the mountains, but soon could be heard wailing at their peaks. Once or twice, the stallion balked at an unusually loud cry from above their heads. But always he settled, trusting Janir that it was nothing to concern himself with. Kalbo's ears twitched, and soon Janir heard a voice being carried on the steady breeze. Curious, if a bit apprehensive, she turned Kalbo and continued in a southeasterly direction through the pines. As she drew closer, she could hear the rushing of a river and words from formerly indistinct moaning. The horse and rider emerged from the trees, and Janir reined in Kalbo to behold a rather odd little person. He looked to be a few years her junior, with spiky red hair that stood on end. His freckled face was contorted into a look of self-pity. A pale stare gaped blankly into the distance, too busy daydreaming to notice the bay stallion and his incredulous rider. The complainer was shorter than Janir, with no muscles to speak of and skinnier than a willow branch. He was wearing a shapeless robe of indistinguishable color. Janir couldn't tell if it was a faded brown or a dirty gray. The odd clothing was much too big for him and resembled a huge sea creature swallowing him alive. He was suspended by the back of the shapeless garment from the branch of a leaning pine tree, dangling precariously above the ground. Woe to me! I am out here all alone, away from the worn kitchens and bright banquet halls of home, he moaned pathetically. Kalbo snorted, and the boy snapped to attention. He surveyed the girl and horse for a moment, then asked, "Have you any rolls or cheese?" Janir shook her head. "What are you doing here?" It came out a bit sharper than she had intended. "Have you any food at all?" "I believe you have larger problems than food," Janir pointed out. She glanced around but could see no signs of anyone else nearby. "Yes, but at the moment I am rather hungry." "What are you doing here?" Janir repeated. How do you mean?" "Here, in the mountains. What are you doing?" "At the moment, I have been strung up by my robe and am dangling from a tree, so I'm not doing much of anything," he explained, pointing to where his robe was caught on the pine. "Why are you here?" She tried to make the question easier. "Because I can't move." Taking a deep breath, Janir attempted a different angle. "Why are you here instead of wherever it is you come from?" "I left," the boy bluntly stated. staring at her in a way that said he considered her to be stupid. "Why did you leave?" "I wanted to be somewhere else." He blinked disgustedly at her lack of understanding. Before he could fail to explain himself any longer, the suspensory branch snapped, and the boy landed in a jumbled heap of robe and white legs. Colbo shied, and Janir held his reins until he steadied. The boy shuffled and clambered to his feet. "Carlisle Kerwin, Enchanter of the 9th degree," the boy declared with a sweeping bow made less impressive by the pine needles in his hair. "9th degree," Janir scoffed. "You couldn't even save yourself up there, and you expect me to believe that?" "Well, I am very close to the 9th degree," Carlisle protested. "How close?" "Well, I do have a few degrees to go before I am of the 9th, he sheepishly admitted. "How many?" 8. Prone to exaggeration though he might be, Janir deemed that this boy was harmless and alone, whoever or whatever he was. Swinging down from the saddle, she held Colbo's reins and politely announced her own name. "Janir Kayerson." No sooner had the words crossed her lips than she realized she should have at least withheld the anomalous last name. But hopefully the lad wouldn't notice. Kayerson? So he had noticed. Janir Kayerson. He was looking at her strangely. She thought he might even be excited, but it was gone a moment later. "What about it?" Janir shrugged, hoping to brush it off as irrelevant. "Pleased to meet you, Janir." He grinned and offered a clumsy bow. "Do you have any food?" "Don't you have somewhere to go?" "Oh no, I think I'll keep you company for a while." "Lucky me," she muttered. Janir took a deep breath and wondered if perhaps she shouldn't ride off and leave him while she had the chance. Janir sat by the fire Carlisle had made. Even an enchanter of the 1st degree could start a fire, and for that Janir was thankful. Through some stroke of luck, she'd caught a rabbit with a snare like the ones Armandius had taught her to make. While she still had qualms about killing things, she found using snares mostly bearable. Of course, she had to clean the rabbit. Carlisle claimed a terror of blood. He whined the entire time she was skinning and cooking the rabbit, then ate more than his share, but pity kept her from abandoning him. He was alone out here, with nothing but his robe, and would probably starve if she were to leave him. All the same, she was fast learning that it was possible to pity someone while wanting to slap him at the same time. He didn't seem to care that she was a girl, or that any decent boy would have offered to do the work for her. The imp was probably too selfish to lift a finger for anyone. Her pity faltered just a little. Janir stared in disbelief as the skinny boy consumed more than 2/3 of her catch. He would have eaten the whole thing, bones, hair, and all, had she not stood her ground. "I caught it, I cleaned it, I cooked it, I eat it," she shouted angrily, tearing off a back leg. "No need to be selfish," protested Carlisle. Janir was beginning to loathe this annoying little troublemaker. She suddenly understood why someone would leave him hanging from his robe. Perhaps she should have asked more questions, but she was not used to meeting many strangers, much less sizing them up. "Who put you in the tree, Carlisle?" "A very unpleasant fellow," the enchanter mumbled through a mouthful of rabbit. "I'm not so sure. I was out here riding when I meet this man on a horse. Well, we start chatting, And he can't give me a good excuse for why he's out here, and he won't answer any of my questions. Carlyle had not, Janir noted, demanded an explanation for her presence. Then, next thing you know, the atrocious little goblin has strung me up on the tree. Carlyle jammed a piece of rabbit in his mouth. My pony's probably halfway home by now. Little traitor. Is that the whole of it? Well, yes, do you call me a liar? Carlyle righteously exclaimed through a mouthful of rabbit's flesh. I think you have more of an explanation there, Janir countered. Well, I don't, and it's too bad for you. Janir rolled her eyes. If nothing else, being annoyed with him was a good distraction to her current predicament. You know, Carlyle remarked between mouthfuls of Janir's rabbit, you should take me seriously. I was on very important business. Of course you were. Carlyle didn't seem to hear her. I was going to find the key of Amatons. Janir had heard of the key of Amatons, just as any respectable child who attended temple. The enchanter who had saved all the lands from a horde of scaled monsters, Mazag, was often a central statue in religious sites and a character in epics and ballads. But she had stopped taking Carlyle seriously several hours ago and didn't give it much thought. Janir leaned against the trunk of a tree. Little sleep these past days had taken their toll, and she was exhausted. She could only hope that she wouldn't dream of Ronan's corpse or the feel of his spine snapping in her hands. A shudder shivered down her back, but Carlyle seemed not to notice. Janir tried to push the memory as far from her mind as possible, letting sleep catch up with her. As she was drifting off, she heard, "Infinite power to the one who holds it." If there was one person in creation who shouldn't have infinite power, it just might be Carlyle. What gives infinite power? Haven't you been listening? Carlyle demanded. No, I haven't. Janir found the small measure of concern was fast slipping away. She didn't think she cared anymore and just wanted to sleep. Why are you so irritable? Carlyle complained. I'll tell you why I'm so irritable, you little thistlethorn, she whispered in a dangerously quiet voice. Annoyance and weariness made her temper short. I am alone in this wretched wasteland, with an enchanter of the first degree who... Carlyle swam out of focus. Janir whipped a hand to her face to wipe away the tears before he could see the other things that were wrong. She couldn't tell him. Well, if that's all, why are you complaining like a child? Janir hissed wordlessly and leaned against the tree again. He hadn't even asked why she was out here. He must not care. Do you have any idea what the key is? No. She wanted to sink into the dream world where anything was possible, and she might escape the nightmare her life had become, even if only for a few hours. But with his selfishness, Carlyle was forcing her to keep a grip on reality. We've got to get that key before they do, Carlyle resolutely announced. Look, I've been finding out things, putting pieces together. His voice dropped to a whisper. Janir might have been interested if he had explained what exactly this key was. But he had, she reminded herself, and she didn't care. He kept talking, but she still didn't care. Every so often she would catch snatches of words whether she liked it or not. And my father told me to stop looking for clues, that I was babbling nonsense and should pay more attention to swordplay. But, of course, I wouldn't listen. Janir huffed and rolled over, but caught his last few words. It is so powerful, it can control entire races. Can you imagine? This has been the Broken Enchantments podcast. Thank you for listening. Check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.